So, I spoke about applying for internships back in episode 2, the preparation heel. But I have yet to speak on what it's actually like to do an internship. Talking about my internship experience definitely deserves its own episode, and it's time for me to finally give the subject the treatment it deserves. I'll start now! Also back in episode 2, I stated that I largely applied for communications internships and ended up snagging one very early on. That immensely shocked me, especially given that this internship was with a very high profile organization. I also mentioned that it was at a government accountability organization, and that organization in question is Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, or CREW for short. Believe it or not, I never applied for any internships on Capitol Hill. That wasn't what I was going for. And in fact, no one in my cohort interned on the Hill during the spring semester, despite past cohorts almost always having at least one person interning for a congressperson. Anyways, about my CREW internship. If I had to describe it in one word, stimulating! It was a very stimulating internship. I learned a lot about government accountability efforts, including different federal statutes that I didn't previously understand or even knew existed. It's interesting because I remember being 14 years old and hearing my mother talk about different events such as the DOJ investigations and the like. At the time, I never understood why they were important to learn about. Though now, I can understand government operations pretty quickly, and when in doubt, I tie them back to social justice issues. As a communications intern, I was hands-on with assembling digital content and drafting summaries about steps CREW had taken to demand government transparency. Doing all that work fostered a new research interest in me, and that pertains to connecting government accountability efforts to societal welfare. I'd say that's the most memorable thing I learned at my internship, that government ethics have a far greater impact on American livelihoods than people generally give credit for. I'd say my favorite moment during my internship was the time a county clerk came to the office building to speak with us about their work, the challenges they faced, and how it felt to be at the center of a high-profile case. Towards the end, I asked them a question about the SAVE Act and how they think it will harm U.S. citizens despite its nationalistic overtones. They really liked that I had asked them that question. Likewise, I really liked their answer to my question. My comms internship at CREW had many highlights, and there are no real complaints I have about where I interned at. I honestly couldn't have interned at a better organization this past spring. And I admit, it can be hard to deal with the fact that as an intern, you don't have the same autonomy or privileges as full-time staff members. Even if you mingle with full-time staff really well, there are always several things you must keep in mind as an intern. One of the things being what I just said, that there are differences between you and full-time staff members. I'll clarify this by bringing up something that 2 of my internship mentors once said to me. In the workplace, the remarks you make as an intern may not be taken in the same way they would be if they were coming from a full-time staff member. With seniority differences within organizations, some people in high positions won't find certain internet jokes funny, nor will they always be relaxed while interacting with people they haven't really worked with. That doesn't make them bad people, and that doesn't mean you did or said anything wrong. That said, understand that you'll have to navigate professional spaces in DC with greater levels of formality than you may be used to. Some innocent jokes you might want to make in relation to something may not be appropriate in that environment or with certain individuals. Even if you don't understand what I'm saying now, it'll become more clear to you once you start your internship and interact with full-time staff members at your org. And especially if you get caring mentors who understand workplace etiquette and interactions, it'll click in your head even more. Another thing to keep in mind is that when you're told about an error you made, take responsibility for it. It's okay to apologize, give brief context as to how you made that error, and vow that you won't do it again. It's even okay to feel some embarrassment for a few moments, but don't drag out your explanation, get hostile at your mentors, or dwell on it for so long. People generally move on from hiccups quickly, and even if they don't get so caught up in their feelings that it leads to further mistakes. Just hold yourself accountable, move forward, and recognize that everyone's responsible for their own feelings. Oh, and there's one more point I'd like to give, as I feel that it's the most important one. Read up on your org's confidentiality rules. Seriously, this is one of the first things you must do as you complete onboarding procedures with any organization, especially if you're at a high-profile one. I'll admit that there was one time where I accidentally spoke out of turn to non-staff members, but fortunately, I didn't reveal any confidential info. And I also happened to be off the hook that time due to not being made aware ahead of time that non-staff visitors were coming. Still, you should definitely be in tune with your org's confidentiality rules and remember what isn't considered confidential information. Not to mention, it's important to follow rules regarding social media posting, and you should always be careful with what you post online and even in private group chats, because private doesn't really mean private in cyberspace. Especially if you're making group chats with your roommates and fellow cohort members, only set the group chat image to appropriate images like of landmarks or of nature. Don't set the group chat into one that mocks a politician or makes a derogatory remark at a politician. It could come back to bite you later, so just don't. When it comes to juggling intern work with schoolwork, it's honestly not something you need to overthink, because here's the thing. Unlike on campus, you only have class 1 day a week. And unlike full-time staff and wherever you're interning at, you shouldn't ever be expected to work overtime. That means that you can set a chunk of time either on the weekdays or the weekends. Yes, unfortunately, weekend work's a possibility, to read for a class or do an assignment. Though whatever you do, don't let schoolwork consume your whole seminar. Set time for personal hobbies or for sightseeing around DC, which it'll likely be cold and snowy in DC for the first several weeks, but you'll still have time to see all the places you want to see before you leave. I'll give my sightseeing recommendations in the next episode. Overall, the intern life is a good life. A very, very good life. A stepping stone to becoming who you want to be when you grow up, whether it's to be a chief of staff on Capitol Hill or a senior analyst at an esteemed think tank. When it comes to applying for internships, understand that you may not end up at your first choice organization or that your internship site might be incompatible in the end. Obviously, you want to ensure that you end up somewhere where you feel valued and where you feel that you blend in with your org's culture even as an intern. Although even if you don't, know that you don't deserve mistreatment and that you shouldn't see mistreatment as a normal part of starting a career in policy. Also, not getting an internship at your place of interest doesn't mean you can't apply again or that you'll never get to work at your place of interest. Someone managed to get a summer internship on Capitol Hill after this year's DC seminar ended, and they had previously applied to spring semester positions there. At first, it can be hard to see that you have potential when you get turned down from places of interest. But please know that the turn downs don't define your self-worth, no matter how many "we decided to pursue another candidate" emails you receive.